Hi, in this video we're going to look at how we can use the Quantemplate API to extract process data into a data warehouse running in Azure. This is an overview of what we're going to see today. So a user is going to update a Quantemplate dataset. That's going to trigger a dataset updated event for which we will have a webhook set up with the automation account within Azure. That webhook is going to trigger a runbook written in PowerShell. And that PowerShell runbook is going to kick off a data factory pipeline. That's going to pass through the dataset ID from the notification to the pipeline, which is then going to log into Quantemplate, get an access token, pass that access token to a copy activity, which is going to run the access the download dataset API to download the data. And then you could do many things with it at this point, but in this case, we're going to write that data to a new SQL database table. So a lot of what we'll see today is actually configuration within Azure. There's an awful lot of information online. There's quite a lot of pieces to that puzzle. But what I'm going to show you today is the kind of main building blocks of a solution like this. For the Quantemplate API documentation, you can find the documentation here at quantemplate.readme.io. There's lots of good information here. The key thing that I would pick out is in the guides section, kind of setting up a connection and authenticating, and a worked example of how to download a data set and to set up the notifications. So let's jump into it. Let's have a look, first of all, at the automation part of the Azure offering. So for that, here we're in an automation account that we've set up, a demo account. We've already created here a runbook called Fetch Dataset. Once you've created a runbook, even if it's empty, you can configure a webhook for that runbook. Let's have a quick look at that. So a webhook is a mechanism for having one system provide a notification of an event to another system. So essentially what Azure is doing here is it's creating a special URL, which we can pass to Quantemplate and say, when an event happens within my organization with a data set that's shared, call this URL, access this web page, and pass it information about that event. So you would name this webhook, you would copy this URL, and once you've moved off this page, that URL has disappeared and you can't access it again. So copy that and save that ready to send to Quantemplate. So we've already got that set up. I've already got a webhook set up. Let's have a look at an example. So here's an event that was triggered previously, and this is the JSON payload that was provided by Quantemplate as part of this webhook. I'll just pick out a couple of things here. So the event name is dataset updated. Makes sense, event name dataset updated. And the payload of that event is the dataset ID that's been updated. So really that dataset ID is what we're going to extract from this notification and pass through the rest of the process. So let's jump back and let's have a quick look at the runbook itself. So when we get this webhook call, it passes in an argument called webhook data to this runbook, and then this script will be run. As I mentioned before, first of all, what we'll do is extract the dataset ID. Here I've just hard-coded the pipeline name that we're going to run. This is using Azure libraries to get the credentials in order to run that pipeline. And then it's down here with this run ID that we actually invoke the pipeline and we pass in the parameters. And in this case, the parameter is the dataset ID. The rest of the script is just polling the pipeline to check on progress. Okay, so let's have a look at the pipeline that gets invoked. It's very simple. It's got two steps, as we mentioned previously. There's a web action, which is going to log into the platform. That does that with the authentication API. It's a post request. And here we can see in the body of that request, it's passing in two variables. So it's passing in the client ID and the client secret. When we set up an API user for you on the account, we'll provide these to you in a secure manner. These need to, or particularly the client secret needs to be kept secret. So it's best to store this within the Azure key management, which can be recalled here. So that's going to log into the platform. And once it's logged into the platform, it's going to extract from that request the token, the access token, and that's going to then be provided. That's going to be able to be referenced here in the next step, which is the copy data action or activity. So let's have a look at that here. The copy activity is made up of two steps: the source step and the sync step. The source pulls the data, the sync writes it somewhere. So as we can see in the source step, we've configured it here to obtain the access token from our first activity, and it's going to pass that as part of the request. It's also going to take the dataset ID, which has been passed in as a pipeline parameter. The source dataset is a dataset content, which is something we have created. It is basically just a simple delimited text type dataset. And here is where we've configured the URL for that dataset. And you can see again, the org ID is kind of hard coded, but the dataset ID has been passed in. So that's going to then pull the data. It's going to store it as this delimited text. Then we need to write the data. That's part of the sync activity. And here we are writing it to an Azure SQL table. Again, we're passing the dataset ID, which we're going to use in the sync dataset to create the table name where the data should write. And it's as simple as that. Okay, so let's see this in operation. Now I'm going to jump to Quantemplate. Here is a pipeline. It's a very simple pipeline. It pulls in some data, processes it, and validates it. So let's kick that off. That'll jump us into the run. Now, once this run is complete, it takes a few seconds, we can see that the validation rules have passed. And we're going to export this data to a data set that's already shared with the organization, border over export. So this is sharing it within the Quantemplate platform. I'll update that. But as that data set is updated, an event is fired to that webhook that we set up before, saying that this data set has been updated. So let's jump to that. We can see here that this data set is the one I've targeted, and it's got an ID of 2N22. So let's jump back to Azure. Let's refresh this page. And as we can see, we've now got a queued Runbook. We can click into that. We can actually see the data, and we can see again that our dataset ID, if I can find it in here, is 2N22. So that's working. So that's going to run the script, which in turn is going to run our data factory. You can switch to the monitor tab here to see that running. Might have already finished. Nope, it's still running. And it's helpful here to be able to click this little button here to see the parameters that were passed into this pipeline. And we can see again, D2N22. Let's jump into this, which is now probably finished. Yes, we can see that both stages have completed. And here's our database. So before we ran it, the table was empty. Now we can see the data set is there. Let's select the data. And there we go. There's the data flowed through into our SQL table. So that was the end-to-end process run through to data in our SQL